live and popping, just walking around a basketball court randomly just to do this live with you guys. I gotta tell you, right, when I first started out my channel, I didn't put a description, and I still don't. And by the way, I'm just going to cook up for a little bit. That's not something that I usually like to do. I like to just start straight off the bat without any warning, without any hesitation or anything like that, and just speak my mind and go into the content straight away, right? But with this, I'm going to cook just a little bit, just to kind of give you a bit of some context on everything that I'm about to talk about, from Joe Rogan to Mr. Criminal potentially snitching and the objective truth behind that, along with talking about another objective truth that deals with Joe Rogan and his so-called limits or lack of in the UFC, and we're going to talk about that. So why I didn't ever put any descriptions on my MMA page, which is exactly what this is because I wanted to do content that was also, yes, MMA based, but way beyond the sport of MMA. Okay, so that is the reason why I never put any particular description on the channel or anything like that. That's very important to point out first and foremost. And by the way, it is because of this particular content that I'm doing right now that is precisely the reason why I never put any description on it, because I wanted to be open-ended, but at the same time, I put MMA at the end of my first and last name simply because, well, it's an MMA channel and I want to make no distinctions about that, okay? It's an MMA channel that focuses on the fights, focuses on the business side of the fights, focuses on the psychological parts of the sport, and also the storylines and the news that delves into all these matters at hand. So now, when you have a situation like this going on right now, this is perfect for why I sort of held that theme in terms of being an open-ended channel, but really at the same time, quite frankly, a very diverse channel, but not a diverse channel, but let me put it like this, right? An MMA channel that gives you a different perspective, an MMA channel that sort of gives a perspective on my own take, but not only my own take, also just the world that I'm interested in around it, which can encompass from the world of geopolitics, it can encompass the world of religious matters that are going on around the world, such as, for example, the Palestine and Israeli conflict, along with all the other conflicts that have been going on in the Middle East for quite some time. So it's that, and then on top of that, being interested in the street politics of things, right? Which is where this particular story goes into. But also talking about other things that the other kicks and punch channels don't really like to talk about, which is what? The political aspect of everything that has surrounded the sport. Obviously, I've mentioned this over and over again. You can't have a discussion about mixed martial arts without talking about geopolitics, especially when you look at the dynamics of what's going on with all the geopolitical matters that are going on with people in the world of MMA. For example, Kamzat, just to name a few, different people that you can sort of relate all these matters at hand. Also, how about Paulo Costa? He had a relationship with a very controversial president, similar to what we've seen with Donald Trump and Jorge Masvidal, also with Colby Covington. And it just seems that no fighter wants to endorse Joe Biden by any means. And we could see why, right? He's not that kind of guy. It's not his kind of thing. But let me move on to the main topic at hand after I gave you guys a bit of that introduction to why I'm doing this particular channel and why I'm also doing this particular content. Well, let's start it off. Joe Rogan calls out Disney for having pedo behavior. And I'm not going to say the exact word because you know how it is. You get flagged for saying certain things, and we don't really have true freedom of speech around here. So dance around with me a little bit to try to grasp the message that I'm trying to give you. Joe Rogan went out of his way to call out Disney. By the way, a company that is literally his employer, okay? It is his employer. Why? Because Disney is affiliated with the UFC through ESPN. So in other words, without a TV deal, you're not the mixed martial arts company or the fight promotion that you wish to be. But Joe Rogan has managed to dodge the bullet plenty of times over the years. One example is when people pulled out some voice excerpts of himself saying the N-word in his Joe Rogan podcast experience show. Okay, but what had happened with this? Nothing really happened with it because the minute that they tried to cancel Joe Rogan, Dana White stepped in there and said, if you're going to let Joe go, you're going to have to let me go as well. And you know what? They were completely okay with it. Why? Because understand this. You're dealing with people that have all the money in the world and don't really need you for anything. Dana White doesn't need you for anything. Dana White doesn't need money. He doesn't need to kiss anybody's butt. He works because he has the greatest job in the world. And by the way, a job that Dana White has, it's literally a job that we all would somehow take at any particular salary or any particular circumstances or any particular scheduling. In other words, you would work day and night to have his position. And why would you not? Why would you not? He has the greatest job in the world, especially if you are a fight fan. Everybody who's a fight fan wants to be in the position where Dana White is at. Okay, maybe you don't want the extra hard work that he has to go through, but rest assured, if you had the chance, you would take on Dana White's life in a heartbeat. Okay? But he doesn't need to work. He doesn't need to do this anymore. And that is the same exact reason why you would take his job at any given circumstances. Because it's not about the money at a certain point. He already has $500 million, sorry, to be exact. And maybe even within the billions with this new emerger with TKO and the WWE, which probably increases his revenue and his overall net worth as we speak. So it's the greatest job in the world. And yet he doesn't need to do it. But at the same time, they sort of need him. Because the reason why the company is where it's at is because of him. And of course, that's not really the biggest takeaway out of that. The biggest takeaway out of that is really just the simple fact that Dana White has not only control, but he has the keys to what is going on in the insides of the company, in terms of how it runs, in terms of his negotiations and networks that he's built over the years. So as a result of that, what you got out of Dana White is somebody that can't be moved like a rock. So in other words, if you come in as a new corporation or as a new private investment company and you want to come in here and own the UFC, well, you're not just going to come in there and re-envision the whole entire company in your image, even if you were to buy it. And why is that? Because there's a gatekeeper behind that, and that's Dana White. In other words, if you bought the UFC, if you had all the money in the world, okay, and you bought the UFC today, and you try to change it to your image, you would literally not only desecrate the idea of what the UFC is, but it would cease to exist in every form that it's ever been known to be ever since the Fertitta brothers had bought on that company in the early 2000s. In other words, you're just carrying on the name, but not the actual product in and of itself. Sort of like when the WWE had bought out the WCW. And when they bought out WCW, what did they do? They started making merchandise that was sort of in line with WCW, but not the exact original symbol that it had going on in the first place. So it's kind of important to understand that, right? It's a very different company now that you've bought it. Well, just like if you were to buy the UFC and you were to change everything in the image that is not incoherent or not in resemblance of Dana White or anything that has any similarities to Joe Rogan or the outrageous comments that he makes in between, and not only that, the informative comments that he makes as a result of his play-by-play, yes, you would absolutely water down the company for what it is known. Okay, and I think that a lot of corporate people who buy the UFC sort of have a great understanding of that. If they don't, well, I don't know what to tell you, man. You've been living under a rock, and unfortunately, there's a lot of corporate people out there that live in this bubble to where they think that what the mainstream world wants in terms of quote-unquote no cursing or being polite or this and that, they think that this is what the whole entire world wants. And the reality is, I don't know if that's true, okay? Because wrestling, for example, is a great example of that. You see, for a long time, when Vince McMahon ran the WWE, it was watered down because he had lost touch of what the crowd wants. He still lived in the 80s where he thought that people in the pro wrestling world want somebody that looks like, I don't know, a statue of some sort, or somebody that looks like Arnold Schwarzenegger in his prime, when in reality, what people now understand a combat athlete to be is somebody that is lean, somebody that is strong looking, somebody that is also fast looking and athletic, not a musclehead, meathead, Bradley Martin type of character. That's not what it is, okay? That's not what they are looking for. But on top of that, other matters of storylines and things of that nature. So he lost touch with the reality of what people wanted. So as a result, after losing hold on a second, just making sure. Okay. The common touch of the common man, now all of a sudden people are removing you from that particular position, right? People are now removing you from the CEO seat. The embarrassment that he's brought to the company, now people had decided, you know what, we're not going to deal with this any longer. You know, we're not going to deal with this at all because the scandals that he had going on was just way too much. Now with Joe Rogan, I'm going to tell you right now, I think that Joe Rogan is a symbol of America. Okay, and what do I mean by that? Joe Rogan is neither a right-wing or a left-wing guy, even though some people will take certain excerpts of his life and say, well, you know what? Joe Rogan was a left-wing because he believes in this. Joe is a right-wing guy because he believes in this. Joe is this guy because what he is he is a symbol of America in terms of being a centrist. Now, in all the years that I've studied political science and politics and things of that nature, there's one thing that I had noticed. Every political scientist, every political observer, and people that are in that particular field of geopolitics study all unanimously agree that America is what you would call a center-right country. What does that mean? The right part is the fact that there is a huge population of America that really takes in right-wing values, pride of country, pride of nation, hard work, the same things that were espoused by, let's say, the settlers or the Amish or the people that were first, I guess, how do I say this? I guess conquered this land, right? That's the best way to put it. Because they did. You could argue that they colonized it and they oppressed people and this and that. Yes, all of this is true. But at the same time, the settlers that had came into this land, they've held those views for a certain amount of years, and it's no different than now. So with that in mind, the majority of Americans are also in the belief of fair play. They are in the belief of, let's say, being physically conservative, but socially liberal. Okay, and that's the center aspect that I'm talking about when I'm talking about center-right political leaning of America. And why is that significant that I'm mentioning the political leanings of America when I'm talking about Joe Rogan and his possible cancellation? For one, why that's important is because people need to understand that if Joe Rogan is going to go and call out a bunch of pedos in the company of Disney, I honestly don't think that that's going to affect his standings with the UFC. And not only that, the standings with the company of Endeavor or whoever else that currently owns that company. Why? Because the majority of Americans, but in particular, the majority of people that are in the MMA space are going to defend him. So therefore, what I'm trying to say is that it's very impossible to cancel Joe Rogan. And here's another point to that. MMA, the UFC, is an American company, and it is an American majority fan base. Even though they try to bring in an international audience around the world, check out this soccer field right here, right? This is what they want. They want the soccer crowd of Europe. They want the soccer crowd of Spain, which is why you see a big push with Ilya Tapora. You see all that. You see the big push with Conor McGregor, Darren Till, all these particular men that have a European background and obviously have a European fan base and a worldwide fan base as a result of that. So yes, they want to attract that. They also want to attract a big TV audience in China. But ultimately, I'm sorry to tell you guys, it is an American sport and it is an American fan-driven company. You want proof of that? Let's take a look at UFC 304 that's going to be signed for Manchester, England. So when is that going to be? So 305 is somewhere in August. So that means 304 is going to be somewhere in July, and 303 with Conor McGregor, it's going to be in June, late June, and in early June, it is 302 with Islam and Dustin Poirier. Okay, do you know the time frame of when that fight is going to take place on the main card in Manchester? I'll tell you. That is going to take place literally on the main card time of the United States. And you got to ask yourself why. Because it is the United States that really will spend pay-per-view money on the UFC. That's the God-honest truth. And if you think otherwise, I urge you to take a look at the numbers, and I also urge you to take a look at which countries or which countries don't have pay-per-views, because there's countries where you already get a subscription based just by paying a certain monthly amount, sort of like what they do with DAZN, and then you can watch all the UFC fights. This really is prevalent in a lot of countries, but with Americans, I got to tell you, man, you got to buy the pay-per-view. You got to cough up $80. We're the only ones around the world that are willing to put up with it. But not only put up with it, never having a protest about it, and the fact that these companies such as the UFC, Top Rank, and all these other boxing shows, all these other pay-per-view shows that are involved in combat sports know this, that it is only Americans that will do that. So that is my proof of why I say, whether you like it or not, the UFC is an American-driven sport that tries to garner an international audience one way or another. So that is why Joe Rogan will never be canceled. But also, another reason why Joe Rogan will never be canceled, I need you to understand this. Joe Rogan offers something that is completely different in our realm of reality today. And by the way, this sort of goes into the next topic of discussion that I have with Mr. Criminal, the underground rapper who, by the way, had snitched on his homeboy, supposedly. And I'm going to give you objective truths to this, okay? And by the way, this sort of relates with Joe Rogan in a weird way, but please bear with me as I explain how. So Joe Rogan can't be canceled. Why? Because of the fact that he is too real. He has a product that's very real in his podcast, which means that when you tap in and you listen to this guy, you don't know what he's going to say. There is no format. Whereas in the old school days, everything was a formatted system. In other words, you get on TV, you have a topic of discussion, and then you stick to that, and that's it. You don't go off the beaten path or anything like that. That's Joe Rogan in a nutshell. Unlike Mr. Criminal, who comes from an era, and by the way, let me put in context about Mr. Criminal, okay? So he's a rapper from Southern California. He runs with the Sureño gang, and his hood, the barrio that he comes from is the Silver Lake barrio, which is down in LA. Okay, giving you a little bit of context. He blew up when he was probably 16 years old, so that was somewhere in the early 2000s. So in other words, he was a big underground hit in the 2000s to mid 2000s, so on and so forth. This is Mr. Criminal that I'm talking about, right? And somewhere down the line, he started his own rap label. He started bringing new guys in. He started bringing different acts, right? And one of them is this guy named Diablo. Now, why is this significant? Why is this significant to bring up? Because Diablo is one of his artists that he had on his label. I'm going to tell you exactly what happened, okay? So, one of his label mates, okay, was kicking butt in the world of rap. Not only was he kicking butt in the world of rap, I'm talking about Diablo. He had this song called I'm From a Gang, who reached around maybe 3.4 million views or something like that. So he got hot. He became one of the biggest acts of Mr. Criminal's label. And what had happened was he got into it when one of his sister's boyfriends. What exactly happened? Well, we don't know the clear circumstances of what led to that, but let's just say that his sister got violated by the boyfriend. So what did he do? What did Diablo do? He went out and allegedly, okay, even though he's convicted of it, it's fair to say allegedly, he killed him. Okay, or unalived him. I'm sorry, I don't want to say anything that, you know, basically gets you banned off this page or anything like that. But yeah, he basically unalived him. Okay, for lack of a better term of explanation of things. Now he's doing life as a result. So how did this relate to Mr. Criminal in some kind of way, right? Well, apparently, he came out with a song recently. And by the way, this is already 3 years ago that he's been locked up. Okay, Diablo has already been locked up for a couple of years, and it is now only recently that he started calling Mr. Criminal a snitch. And by the way, I'm being a very objective party in this particular instance, okay? I'm trying to give you the objective truth. I'm not trying to give you any emotional fallacies or anything like that, because that's what a lot of these channels are going to give you, whether they are MMA channels or whether they are gangster channels or whatever genre that you are interested in that made you tune into this particular topic at hand. They're going to give you emotional fallacies. They're going to tell you, well, he did it. Why? Oh, well, because I don't like the guy. That's not what I'm here for. It's not about whether I like the guy or not. I'm literally here to give you the truth and the God honest truth, so help me Allah with that journey into doing so. Did he snitch on him? He apparently said that he did, but he hasn't said this in 3 years. And within those 3 years, he's called into Mr. Criminal's podcast, basically talking quite friendly to him. And that's also important to kind of understand this, right? So why is it now that he's coming out with this? Well, I got to tell you that from what he said in the recent diss song towards Mr. Criminal, he said something to the effect of, "You left me hanging when the cops were coming to get me." So in other words, he probably got pressed on by the cops. And by the way, there's no official paperwork for this. This is why I'm very hyper skeptical of this whole entire snitching narrative that people in Diablo's camp or people that are opposite of Mr. Criminal are saying. There's no absolute paperwork to prove that. So as a result, you don't know. You have to give the benefit of the doubt. But you also have to ask, what makes Diablo wanting to believe that Mr. Criminal had snitched on him? Well, I'm going to tell you right now what it is. I got to tell you, sometimes you have fallouts with your friends. You ever have a situation where, let's say, you have a friend come and stay with you because, let's say, they got kicked out of their house or something to that extent? Well, okay, at some point, and by the way, I've had this happen to me several times where I had a homeboy come and stay with me because they had some side situations going on or they were in between situations. So they had to come stay with me. But those things become very limited in terms of time. And if Mr. Diablo was a fugitive while he was running away from these particular problems that he had going on, how long was Mr. Criminal supposed to harbor him? And that's kind of the question that is going on here. And by the way, we don't know the full story of everything because you have to understand something. Some people will just say the worst things about you when they don't like what you did. And what are some of the worst things that you can say about a person when you are caught up in the West Coast gangster rap world? I'll tell you what it is. Calling them a snitch, because what that basically does is hinder and discredit their gangsterism in order for them to continue and have this career and persona in the game that really is predicated on certain behaviors that you do outside of the studio. So once again, these are important matters to really take a look at. Is Diablo just a guy that was angry and would be willing to lie about his old friend? And by the way, guess what? These types of instances, we've seen this in the world of mixed martial arts, not just in the world of gangster rap. Because in the world of mixed martial arts, guess what? We got a lot of people that are former friends and became enemies as a result of it. This Mr. Criminal stuff is no different than that. It really isn't. Because there's no paperwork. There's no proof that he, quote unquote, snitched. There's no reason for him to do so unless, of course, he was involved in the crime in facilitating it. And that, in and of itself, we don't have enough information. A lot of these people out there that are talking about this particular subject don't have enough information. Just like with Joe Rogan. Whenever that guy gets canceled or whenever that guy gets talked about, there's just so many things that get put and lost out of context. For example, the N-word stuff, okay, that he was saying on his podcast. What about that? Did he really say that? Yes, he did. He said it with a hard R, but the context behind that was that he was explaining or mimicking what a racist white man had said to another black person. And that is the full context of it all. But guess what? If you're a person that hates Joe Rogan, you're not going to want to look at it like that. You're not going to want to look at it like, well, all right, he was mimicking someone, he was paraphrasing someone, or quoting someone. No, you don't want to give him the benefit of the doubt because you don't like him. And right now, Mr. Criminal, he's sort of in this situation where, and by the way, this is where it relates to Joe Rogan. He's sort of in this situation right now where people are going to take face value for what a credited person had said. And why is this Diablo guy so credited in comparison to Mr. Criminal? Well, for one, Mr. Criminal has never really been caught doing any crimes whatsoever, which, by the way, leaves a lot of people suspicious in the rap world. It's either going to give people respect at the fact that, hey, you know what? You're a Sureño rapper, right? And being the fact that you're a Sureño rapper, you have to put in the work. It's not like with other gangs and other ethnicities to where you can get away with saying no or passing up a certain mission. You see, in their world, they literally discipline you if you decide to fall out of line or not follow orders when, let's say, there is a hit going on and you refuse to take that hit. Okay, so in other words, the rate or the possibility of you going to prison is very high based on that. And yet the guy's name is Mr. Criminal, yet he's never somehow committed a crime. Or maybe he just had always gotten away with it. And that's also a possibility that we have to respect. Now, is that a possibility? We don't know. And again, this is a theme of this whole entire thing that I'm trying to explain to you guys, is that we don't know. A lot of these are speculations. And by the way, it's really important to understand and sort of point out when you don't know something. Oftentimes, what a lot of people like to do is they like to create huge assumptions. And as a result of those huge assumptions, they end up missing a few bits and pieces of important information before they go out and say, okay, well, this is the truth of the matter. Okay, this is the objective truth of the matter. This is the subjective aspect of that matter, and the opinions or biasness that person A or person B has going on. Okay, so understand that. But another thing I got to tell you about Mr. Criminal is that, again, he comes from this era that's a little bit different than Joe Rogan, right? And by the way, I'm going to go into one of his recent downfalls and what has gone on as a result of that. One of the downfalls that he has had going on was that he obviously opened up a podcast, just like most people are doing nowadays, right? This is what you do. You create monetization online, you get views, you do lives, but the majority of his lives, I gotta be honest with you, they aren't that compelling. Okay, now, I love the guy as an artist. I think that he's a brilliant rapper. I think that he's a legend in the game. But in all honesty, I think it's fair to say that he's not a great conversationalist. Okay, and there's nothing wrong with that. Because, look, I'm just being objective and real, and I don't care if this is something that he's not going to like, because I'll tell you this. Here's one thing that I will tell you, right? I've been on Mr. Criminal's show quite a few times. I've been on his podcast a few times. I've gotten in there and called in and talked and chopped it up with him. And I got to tell you, he needs that. Okay, but not only that, hey, you know, I need it too, because he sort of helped me, you know, put my shameless plug in there a few times, right, to sort of try to boost my show up. But anyways, he's not a good conversationalist. So he gets on the live, he just says, yeah, where all my people tapping at, or this and that, sort of sounding like an MC. Yeah, put the ones up, or this and that. I could do all that all day. I could sit here all day and literally do that. But will I? No, I'm going to choose not to do that, because obviously there's more substance to my content and the things that I'm going to talk about. But unlike him, that's just not what he does. So he's not a good podcast type of guy, right? But he believes that because he had this, he had this movie deal with Will Smith. He was featured as one of the essays during the time of when they were, in that storyline where they were dealing with the orcs. You guys know the Bright movie on Netflix, right? You guys know what I'm talking about. So he was featured in that. So he thinks because he was featured in a huge motion picture movie with Will Smith, he thinks that somehow that's going to automatically garner him attention. And by the way, This is one of the biggest problems that many fighters and old school rappers have going on when they try to move into the new space of social media and a new space of YouTube and things of that nature. This is a very big problem for them because they think that they have this clout doing a movie with Will Smith. They think because they have this clout of, let's say, having championship fights after championship fights, that somehow that's going to translate into views and attention. And unfortunately, a lot of these guys really have to have a rude awakening and realize there are guys that have never fought before. There are guys that have never been in a rap studio, that have never been famous, that have never been in any of these types of levels that many of these people that I'm talking to you about have. They've never been in any of that. But guess what? Guys like MMA Guru, guys like Mexican mixed martial arts or Lucas Tracy, all these guys that have never fought somehow have the best MMA channels. And guess what? That's a reality that you have to live by in today's modern world. Okay, people are just going to be interested in other people that, well, you know what? That's the thing about it. You don't know what people are interested in. And unfortunately, people that are within Mr. Criminal's age group, and by the way, I'm not that far away from his age group. The guy is like probably in his 40s right now, early 40s or something like that. Me, I'm right around in my late 30s, right? So we're not that far away. But I gotta tell you, unlike guys his age group, I sort of understand the power of social media, the power of YouTube, and the power of alternative media. This is not something a lot of those guys understand, unfortunately. And because they don't understand that, well, this is the reason why they fall off to the wayside. This is the reason why, they don't get as much views. This is the reason why they're not able to be as successful in terms of their marketing endeavors or their ways of promoting themselves or any type of endeavor that gets them, positive attention, right? They don't know how to do any of those things. They don't understand algorithm. They don't understand any of these things that, quite frankly, are helpful to your business venture in YouTube or other social media aspects of entertainment. They don't understand that. What they understand is just their own power of clout, their own power of what they did in the past as opposed to what they can do now. And that is the reason why, even before the snitching allegation and all of that, why Mr. Criminal sort of had some issues with people accusing him of, how about this, buying subscribers. So not only do people think he went out and snitched and did all of these things, broke the code and all these other aspects that are taboo in his world, but even worse, okay, they thought, or allegedly, he had bought some subscribers. Which, by the way, is a big no-no in the world of YouTube, because guess what? The minute you start buying subscribers, YouTube is going to look at that and they're going to demonetize you because they won't know how to really gauge your particular engagement. And they won't know how to really properly pay the advertisers or what they need to get out of the cut from the advertisers and things of that nature. So, again, fakeness in the long term really doesn't get you anywhere. But I'm going to end it with this. Realness not only has longevity behind it, but it also helps you with the protection of people that are real. Because just like what I mentioned earlier, what America is exactly what? It's literally a centrist right nation. Right? So in other words, there's a lot of people that are going to have conservative values, but there's also going to be a lot of people that love to call it down the middle. And that right there is real. That right there is a reality of America. And that right there is what gets you undenying support, as opposed to just support that you can buy from a bot that you can buy from people, that you can buy from advertisers, or you can buy off an agenda machine. But I'm going to tell you what you can't buy. You can't buy realness. And that's something that you always have to remember. So that is all that I have for this 40 minutes. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you guys soon. Inshallah.